Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of BizBooks. My name is Gene Marks, and if you're familiar by now, this is the web series that and podcast series where I speak to a lot of great business authors about the books that they have written. Today, I am speaking with Mark Ackler, who is co-author of a book called Exit Right: How to Sell Your Startup, Maximize Your Return, and Build Your Legacy. Mark co-wrote this book with Mert E. Sherry. Mert is not here for this conversation. It is just Mark. But Mark, first of all, thanks for joining me. What a great book. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, Gene, thanks. You know, it's such an honor. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you and your audience, and it's so nice to be here. So
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, me too. And this is it's a fascinating book because I've been talking to other authors that have been writing books on buying and selling businesses, and this has a different angle, which I'll explain a little bit in a minute. But before we even get to that, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to write this book.
Well, thanks. Yeah, the danger of asking an old guy with adult ADD my story. I'll give you the short version. The short version is I've been in tech all my life, worked at Apple in the very beginning days. I've got great Steve Jobs stories from early on, the
Mm,
beginning, and became an entrepreneur. So I started four different companies where I was the co founder, CEO. The first one did okay, second one failed miserably, lots of scar tissue. Third one did great, fourth one did better. And then I became a venture capitalist. So in the dot-com days, had the first fund. Life was good. Companies were going public. That second fund, when the crash hit,
mhm.
not so much fun. But I'm very proud to say 12 years later that we were in the top quartile for our vintage in venture capital, which doesn't mean anything other than we got our LPs their money back and we were in the black. And then I started a fourth company. And then I went to Redbox, the movie kiosks,
Yeah,
where I was the head of innovation, part of the executive team, and also the interim chief marketing officer for the company, helped them build and grow and scale that business. And then I started my current venture capital fund in 2013 called Math Venture Partners. And so I'm a VC, and I'm also, as you can see from the T-shirt, an adjunct professor at Northwestern, at Kellogg, their business school, where I'm teaching tonight.
are you teaching? Is your class or your course on selling or buying businesses, or is it on other topics?
No, other topics. So this is my 10th year.
Right.
I'm teaching two classes. One is called Building Innovation Teams and Culture.
Mm.
So my joke is I'm the professor the other professors make fun of because I talk about the soft stuff. And I'm also teaching a class starting in the spring on entrepreneurial leadership
Great.
and sort of the tenets of leadership.
So why write this book?
It's a great story. So look, I've been a CEO four times. I've gone through plenty of exits as a CEO. I've been a VC since 1996. I've invested in over 100 companies, sat on dozens of boards, gone through many transactions as an investor and as a board member. And I really, I thought I had a pretty good handle on it.
Mm.
And so my partner, Mert, was a young entrepreneur. And he came 10 years ago when he was starting his business. He came to pitch me to invest in his company. And we said no. My partner and I, Troy, we said no. But we really liked Mert. Mert
Mm.
was a great guy.
Mm.
And so we became friends, and I became a coach and a mentor. And over the course of years, as his business grew, he came and pitched us several times. We always said no. It just didn't meet our investment thesis.
Mhm.
But when it came time to sell his business, and even though I wasn't an investor and I wasn't on his board, I was the go to phone call.
Mm.
All entrepreneurs, all transactions have an emotional arc. All transactions have the ups and downs. There's a pencil down moment where the transaction is hanging by a thread. And, I was the phone call. I was the call. I was the guy who's talking him off the ceiling and helping him through the difficult moments of the transaction. And when it was over, This is in March of 2020, right a week before everything shut down for COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also part of the urgency of the transaction. And it was a difficult transaction.
Hmm.
And Mert and I, a couple of days later, after it closed, we're having coffee, and Mert's bitching. Like Mert's just, rah, 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 rah. I go, Mert,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute. This is a moment of joy.
Yeah.
You just sold your company.
Yeah.
It's a life-changing event.
Yeah.
Like, you should be happy. And you're going to have to work with these people for the next, a year, 2 years, 3 years, however long you can hold out. Like, you don't want to start a new relationship on a bad footing.
Sure.
And I said to Mert, in the spirit of giving back, why don't you write it down? Write down all your feelings, write down what happened, so that the next time, in his case, the acquiring company was SC Johnson, big consumer, packaged good, consumers goods company. The next time they buy a tech company, and they could buy warehouses and other CPG companies, but they really never had bought a tech company before. And there's some nuances to it, right? And I said, the next time they buy a tech company, you can say now that you're on the inside, you can say to them, hey, this is what I went through.
Sure.
Here's how we can make the experience better.
Sure.
Outpoured 10 pages. And I looked at that and I went,
there's a book in there somewhere.
There's a book in there.
Yeah.
And once again, in the spirit of giving back and the spirit of helping other entrepreneurs, we realized, like, there's a lot of wisdom that most entrepreneurs, especially first-time entrepreneurs, don't really have access to.
Right. That's right. That's right.
And so we set out to write a book.
It makes complete sense. And what this book is different from other buying and selling, books, because most of the people I've talked to, and Mark, most of my clients, I'm a CPA. I have a lot of clients with they skew older demographic. Right. So you got people running businesses, they're family-owned businesses. They're thinking about succession planning. They're thinking about exiting out. They sell, pipes, and they sell containers, and they sell, metal framing. That's like kind of their business. But this, I don't think, although they can take a lot of information from this book. So I don't want to dissuade anybody, from getting value from this book, but this seems to be targeted at a specific type of business, a tech business. And you even say in the title, you say how to sell your startup, which is also sort of goes, you think like, well, I just started up my business. Why am I selling it? So why take that approach?
Well, so first of all, we do come from a technology background. And while the principles in the book apply to any business, everybody, we do write it from the lens of a more startup world, technology world. We interviewed dozens and dozens of CEOs from small companies and medium-sized companies, from large companies, from many different industries. And we asked the CEOs, tell us the real story.
Yeah.
Most buying and selling companies, most people don't talk about it. One, because there's confidentiality agreements, like you're prohibited. Sure. The second is, if it was a really good outcome, nobody wants to brag. I'm from the Midwest, especially, we're a little bit like, we don't like to brag. Or if it was a bad outcome,
nobody wants to admit it.
Nobody wants to admit it. And so we said, tell us, if you had an adult child who was selling a business, tell us like the real story. Like, what would you tell them?
Right.
And we're big believers in empathy. So we interviewed all the stakeholders around the table. We interviewed bankers, and we interviewed M&A attorneys, and we interviewed the heads of corp dev for all these major major, in this case, mostly technology companies. Right. And we asked the leaders at corp dev, like, tell us examples of some of your best deals and why, and what made it such a good deal. And tell us examples of some of your worst deals.
Yeah.
Because a lot of deals fall apart and are never successful. right? And we said, what do you wish CEOs knew before they came to talk to you? Right? And we got all of this incredible wisdom that we sort of organized and collected in a framework that we'll talk about in a second. We call it
it's coming
FAIR
up.
framework.
FAIR framework. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, you start off and you dig into, I mean, the whole book is really aligned around this framework. And the FAIR framework, as as you present it, as you introduce it, it stands for fit, alignment, integration, and rationale. So Mark, walk us through this. And again, I also want to say, I don't want to, this is not to discourage people from buying the book, because we're having a short conversation about it. And there is a lot more detail to be found when reading the book. But again, just for somebody being introduced to it and to to encourage people to dig into it further, tell me more about the FAIR framework.
Yeah. So we're in the as I'm a venture capitalist, so I invest in technology companies. And I think of myself as sort of in the pattern recognition business. And over the course of decades, you sort of you see patterns. And one of the things that we saw in all of these interviews and all of my experience going through M&A is some patterns. And we were able to put that together in this framework. So FIT stands for cultural fit.
Okay.
Can you, do you like the people? Do you share values? Can you can you spend a day with the other person and, not want to scream at the end of the day? Can you, when the doors are closed and decisions are made, do you share that same sort of cultural orientation of how you make decisions?
If I can interrupt you for a minute. So, the book is about selling your startup. So when you're saying, do you like the people, are you saying as a seller, do you like the people that are going to be acquiring your business, or the other way around? Okay.
Well, actually, yes. Okay. Both ways.
Yes.
Right. I think this framework is actually bi-directional. It's every bit as much for people who are purchasing businesses as it is for people who are being acquired.
So and again, apologies for interrupting, but it's a really important point that I'd like you to make, is that you said, does the buyer fit into the culture of the company, right? If I'm selling the business, say we take it from that side, right? Why would a seller care? If I'm selling my business, okay, maybe it's my baby, maybe it's not my baby, but I'm getting my check and I'm getting out of here. Why would I care that the buyer fits into the culture of my company, which I'm leaving?
Well, that's a great question. And maybe you're leaving, maybe.
Right.
But let me ask you a question. Which is, I'm a big believer in servant leadership, meaning there's a greater responsibility. So if you think of it as a zero-sum game, where the only thing that matters is the size of the check I get, the founder, okay, that's one lens to look at it.
Yep.
But we have a greater responsibility. And so one of the questions I ask CEOs who sell their company is, what's the time horizon that you're evaluating this on? And will your employees, will they come to work for you if you start a next company?
Yep.
Did you really take care of your employees?
Right.
Will your customers, is this the best home for your customers? You just spent, X number of years, hopefully you love your customers, hopefully you care about them. Is this going to be, are you going to orphan them? Is this going to be a good home for your customers, your partners, if you have investors? My question is, will your investors invest in your next company? Right.
It's amazing how the attitude towards companies really have. I mean, you remember the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas, 100 years ago, and the whole basis is that he's the ugly venture capitalist that's gonna buy a business and break it up into pieces and sell off the assets or whatever. That still goes on, obviously, and in the end, it's a free market, and people are gonna still want to try and profit. But I think you're right. For most of the clients that I see, most of the people that I interview, they built something. They recognize the importance of their employees, their customers, their partners, their suppliers. As an organization of people that depend on them, and just to walk away from that just because you get a big check, I'm finding fewer people willing to do that. And you mentioned something as well, just about it's not just, it's a small world that we live in. It is a small world. And
Damn
you,
straight.
you can't just walk away from a transaction. I mean, if you behave in a certain way in a transaction, you're going to be back at some point. You're going to be doing business with these people in the future. And that sticks with
Right.
you, right?
Your reputation, like once again, are you short term or long term?
Yeah.
Your reputation, your legacy. We put the word legacy in the title of the book for a reason,
Right.
because we think we have a longer term time horizon, and your reputation really matters. I mean, so that's cultural fit.
Yeah. Okay.
The second piece of it is alignment. And alignment is, are all the stakeholders on both sides of the equation, are your board of directors, your investors, your co-founders, your employees, your spouse, your significant other.
Sure.
You have alignment of interests on one side of the equation. And on the other side, and this is a really important point, oftentimes in a transaction, there's always a champion of the acquiring company has a champion. Sometimes it's the CEO, sometimes it's the head of sales or the head of product, or like there's always somebody who's the champion. And most, especially inexperienced CEOs, rely on the champion of the acquiring company to build alignment internally from the acquiring company's perspective.
Okay.
And we have a different point of view, which is you can't outsource. Like, even though it's your job not to work with your champion, to make sure that you identify all the key stakeholders and you make sure they're all on board. Okay. A lot of transactions fall apart because the CFO isn't aligned, or the board of directors, the CEO, or there's alignment is really, really important. Yeah. And if you're being acquired, you just can't trust your champion to do it for you.
Got it. You say all the stakeholders, and I have to ask you, in your experience, is that reality? I mean, do all the stakeholders ultimately get aligned, or is it, or is it, have you seen in your experience that, the more reality is 80 to 90% of them are aligned and the others just go along?
Of course, human nature, right? But you got to have enough. Like, the question is, who can kill it?
Yes, because there are stakeholders and there are stakeholders, right?
Right. And look, you're going to be spending an enormous amount of time, like going through a transaction. You're taking your eyes off the ball. You're like, it is a time suck like nobody's ever, like, you can't imagine how much time it's going to take. And so you want to, if you're going to invest that amount of time, energy, and this is your baby, your lifeblood, like this is your future. Like, there's some things you just can't outsource. So alignment.
So fit and alignment are the first two letters in the acronym FAIR. Now we're up to integration. Go ahead.
Yeah. So integration is the ugly stepchild. Integration, everybody says, oh yeah, like we'll deal with that after the deal closes.
Right. True.
Always. But integration is, all right, what kind of resources are we going to get? What's our budget? Are we going to be integrated with the acquiring company's sales team?
Yeah.
Are we going to have investment in technology? Yeah. Are the technology platforms going to be if it's technology? I come from a technology world. Yeah. Like, is it going to be integrated?
Yeah.
And it matters.
Yeah.
It matters for your current employees.
Yeah.
But more importantly, in my world, a lot of times a transaction has two components. There's some money up front, and there's some money in the future based on hitting some performance objectives. Well, the minute you sell your company, you're no longer in control. So if you don't have a well-articulated integration plan, and you have earnouts based on hitting some performance objectives,
yeah,
and you don't get the resources necessary to hit those objectives, Like there's real significant material financial implications to you. And if you don't really have a well thought through and written down integration plan.
And I've got actually two things to add to that, which I couldn't agree with you more. I would say out of the 4 items in this acronym for FAIR, Mark, for your employees, it seems like integration would probably be the most important thing. You know, for Chilo, I'd be first, because what happens if you're working for a company and then you find out that your company is being sold? I mean, what's your first thought? Am I going to lose my job? You know, like how is this company going to integrate into the acquiring company? Are they going to eliminate my department or whatever? So that has to be thought out in advance, if only to, you know, for your employees to know, because again, whoever's buying your company, one of the biggest reasons I'm sure is because of your workplace and your employees and the talent, you know, that you have. So that's got to be thought. And then I think the other part of it, and this is more from an IT standpoint, is there are a lot of integration issues, not only from IT, but also just policy, process, procedure, how things are done. And even if somebody is like, yeah, okay, well, I'm definitely not going to be fired. I'm the I'm the IT manager. I'm in charge of this ERP system, or whatever. The stress and the headaches that it starts, saying like, oh shit, they've got Dynamics and we've got Sage, so my next year is going to be like hell, it's a that has to be thought about and addressed in advance, because people will quit, when they hear, of stuff like that.
Absolutely. And it's very rarely happens. Integration is never discussed as part of the deal up front. And then the last piece, and I think the most important piece, is rationale. Is how is 1 + 1 = 100? Right. And what's really interesting is most transactions are usually based on a multiple of some financial number. So it could be a multiple of EBITDA, or it could be a multiple of top line revenue. Every business, every industry is a little bit different, or how it's measured.
Right.
But if you think about it, that's looking backwards, right? So that is a financial statement. This is historically what we have done in the past.
Yep.
And we're giving you a little bit of a premium because of what you've done in the past.
Yep.
But my question is, what could we do together with the new company?
Right.
So I will use a couple examples. So one example, when Facebook, now Meta, bought Instagram. Instagram was a small company, like 14 people. They had virtually no revenue.
Right.
And Mark Zuckerberg bought them for just under $1 billion. And everybody thought, oh my God, this guy's lost it.
Right.
A zero revenue company.
Right.
But what they didn't understand is the rationale. Like, why did they buy them?
Yeah.
And last year, Instagram represented over 20 billion with a B, 20 billion of revenue to Facebook. What they didn't understand is if you took the Instagram numbers and put it inside the Facebook sales team, what could the Facebook sales team do? The ad sales team do off of those numbers? And what they also didn't understand is that Facebook at the time was very much in the web based and not in mobile. And Instagram was mostly mobile. And this was a way for Facebook to philosophically move more into the mobile marketplace.
Sure.
Right. And so that rationale, I'll give you another example.
Please.
My partner, Troy, at my venture fund, Math Venture Partners, when he was a young guy, he had a business in the late 1980s, early 1990s. It was a little dev shop. It was just a little development shop. And they did a project for Hyatt Hotels, which was an inventory management system where they maintained the intellectual property rights for. And they decided to pitch Medline. Medline's a big hospital supply company. They sell consumables to most hospitals, and they pitched Medline on this property management software, and Medline says, "Yeah, that's great. We want to do it, but we want to buy you." And Troy went, "I'm not for sale. I just want some business."
Right.
They went, "No, no, no. We really want to buy you." And so they offered, at the time, his business was doing about $1 million. And dev shops, they got a 1x, maybe a 1.5x. And Medline offered him $2 million. And he said no. And then they came back and said $3 million. He said no. And finally, they came back and they offered him $5 million. And Troy's like, "I've got this little $1 million business. You're going to give me 5x, right?" And Troy went, "Okay.
How can I say no?" Right.
Right. Fine. Right. Okay. And Troy's thinking to himself, "Oh my God, these guys are idiots. I just nailed it. I am the smartest negotiator on the planet."
I think I know what's coming.
Well, Troy never bothered to ask, "Well, why are you buying us? And how are you going to use us?" And turns out what Medline did, is they went to all of their customers and said, "We got this new asset management system. And if you extend your contract from 1 year to 3 years, we'll throw it in for free."
Okay.
First year, they generated over $100 million of new revenue on this platform. $100 million. Now, that's year one. Year two, year three. Now you take the Medline multiple, what's Medline worth?
Yeah.
Right? Easily, he generated $1 billion of market cap for Medline over the course of a few years.
Yeah.
Easy. Right? Because he never bothered to ask, what's the rationale? How are you going to use this?
Do you realize, Mark, that your friend and partner, Troy, violated every single part of the FAIR framework? He didn't see the fit. He didn't see the alignment. He didn't understand the integration. He didn't even understand the rationale. He still sold the business for $5 million.
It was a good day. Right. Yeah. So anyway, that's just an example. And so we have this saying. So I'm a big believer in empathy. I have 3 rules of empathy.
Right.
It's not about you. It's always about the person sitting across the table.
Right.
Do your homework.
Right.
Really do your homework, deeply.
Right.
And bring a gift, which is add value.
Right.
Right. So part of the relationships here is when we talk to the heads of corp dev from Apple and Google and Facebook and Meta and Amazon and Snowflake and Atlassian and all these big companies, they said, "We like to buy companies from people that we trust, people that we have relationships with." And so one of the things that is in the book is building relationships early.
Right.
And really getting to know, because in order to create a rationale where 1 + 1 = 100, you're going to have to really understand the acquiring company, who they are, what they need, how you can add value.
Sure.
Right? So, which brings me to another part, which is the exit talk. Okay. I don't know if you saw that part in the book.
Of course.
So there is a stigma to talking about exits.
Yep.
CEOs are kind of afraid to talk about exits with their boards of directors because they feel like their investors, their board are going to feel like, oh, if they're talking about an exit, then their heart's not in it.
Right.
They're ready. They're giving up.
Right.
That they're ready. That they might get fired.
Right.
And we have an opposite approach. Most people think in our world, just put your head down, build a great company, and eventually something good will happen.
Right.
We think that we should have a regularly scheduled, once a year, annual exit talk. That the exit should be a strategic conversation where it's a safe zone, where the CEO can lead a conversation that says, look, life is good. We're still growing market share. If it's technology, the technology is still ahead of the curve.
Yep.
We're not ready.
Yep.
But over the course of years,
Yep.
as things change and evolve, and maybe you have new competition, maybe you're getting older or tired, maybe the technology needs some serious investment, or the product line needs some serious investment. And if you have that conversation, you can build alignment. And in my world, the venture capital world, VCs have a time horizon. So if you're year one of a venture fund, we're like, yay, go for it. Mm-hmm. If you're year 10 of a venture fund, it's like,
show me the money.
Yeah, we got to get our LPs their money back.
That's right.
Right. And so building alignment and time horizon, but what it really does is it gives you the luxury of time. Because if you can plan out 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, and you think your acquirer will be, maybe it could be your competition, maybe it's a strategic buyer. If it's a strategic buyer, maybe they care about top line revenue, and you can maybe, turn the knobs a little bit, hire some more salespeople, invest a little bit more in marketing, push the top line a little bit harder. It gives you a chance to get your data room in order.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons when we talked to corp dev leaders and we said, how come deals fall apart? Number one answer, sloppy data room.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the data room? A data room is where all your financial statements are, making sure they're in really, pristine
your contracts, your agreements, all the supporting documentation for it. Yep.
Intellectual property. Sure, your trademarks are filed. If you have patents, they're up to date. That the IP assignments from your employees are all signed.
Yep. Right. All the things that you should be doing anyway, that so many businesses kind of ignore until they get to the conversations about exiting out of their business. Like, oh, geez, we have to address all this.
But you should be doing that ongoing.
From the very beginning. Yeah, from the very beginning. It's almost like I was just having a conversation with a prospective client, not a prospective, current client, who was talking about like maybe they're going to sell their business sometime. And we were saying like, well, if you think you're going to sell your business sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, you should be getting audits of your financials like now. Like you don't bring in the accountants at the time of your exits where they have to go back 3 to 5 years, like start that process now. I have a question for you on that though, because it was one thing that you lightly touched on in the book, and I was curious if you could kind of expand on it. Is when if you think about exits from the beginning, and you do have regularly scheduled meetings to discuss an potential exit for the business, just to make sure you're aligned and you're staying good with your strategy. Do you ever have any clients of yours or any companies you've invested in that where they're identifying even at an early stage potential buyers?
Sure.
So they're saying like, you know what, I know we just started this business this year. We're not going to sell it anytime soon, but if we're going to sell it, we're one of our target buyers is Meta, for example. And if that's the case, what do we need to be doing now that would make ourselves very attractive to that target buyer 5 years from now? Is that a common thing to think about?
For sure. And building relationships, reaching out to them, talking to the corp dev leaders, talking to product managers, like finding out where they're going and where they care about and where the holes are. By the way, I'm a big believer in understanding the financial levers and the KPIs of a strategic partner. So sort of like the Jedi mind trick is, if you're working with a publicly traded company, they have a quarterly earnings call. You should be listening in on that or reading the transcripts of the quarterly earnings calls. And you should see what KPIs they're reporting on. Like what do they really care about? And you should listen in to the analysts and what questions are the analysts asking? And what do the analysts care about?
What if it's not publicly held? Where would you go for that information?
I would just reach out to them directly. Okay. And by the way, we talk about like, should you be talking to your competition? I think you should. Like, I think you should be talking to your strategic partners. I think you should be talking to your competition. And we're not saying give away trade secrets and open up the kimono and give them financials. I'm not saying that at all. But you could be having the conversation of how do we make our industry larger? How do we grow the pie for everybody?
Mm,
Right.
right.
And you could be perceived as a thought leader because going back to bring a gift, adding value. When I sold my first company, I sold it to Symantec in 1992. But before I sold it to Symantec, I built up over the years. Every time I went to Silicon Valley, I dropped in on Gordon Eubanks, who was the CEO at the time of Symantec. We built a relationship, we built trust, we talked about just what's happening in the industry at large.
Sure.
And so that when it was time to sell the company, I just picked up the phone to Gordon and said, "Hey, Gordon, I got an unsolicited offer. I wasn't planning on selling the company, but now that we're considering it, you're my first call."
Mm.
And he's like, "Yeah, let's talk."
Yeah, because you've had a relationship and you built that up. And by the way, although you do mention about not giving away trade secrets or whatever. Also, we all need to be careful when we're talking to competitors about potential anti-competitive regulations,
Well, of course.
obviously, and price fixing, that kind of
Yes.
stuff. So yes, we grow the industry, but on a relative basis. Mark,
Yeah.
I want to jump into just a couple things that you also, we only have about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to I mean, this is just a great conversation, and just a couple points I wanted you to flesh out, for our listeners and our viewers. You talk about the cap table, and you talk about cap table management, and you say it's one of the most important decisions you've got to make, right at the very beginning. What do you mean by cap table management? What do you mean by dead equity?
Oh, it's such a great question. Thanks, Gene. The decisions you make at the beginning of your journey
Mm,
have an outsized impact at the end of your journey around equity.
mm,
Who gets what? And many entrepreneurs, especially inexperienced first time entrepreneurs, when they start businesses for the first time, tend to be much more liberal and give away equity. And so, debt equity is equity that's being held by people who are not actively participating in the company at the time. So it could be a co-founder who left. It could be some executives who are no longer there. It
mm,
could be an advisor that you gave shares to who really didn't add value.
mm.
And when there's a sale, there's something called a waterfall distribution of assets, which is just a fancy term for saying who gets what. When the company gets sold, how do we decide who gets paid what? And in my world, in the technology world, oftentimes there are preferred shares and common shares. And so preferred shares oftentimes have not only control provisions, but we also have financial provisions such as there's like a 2x preference
Right.
or participating preferred, or there's a dividend, which, by the way, are all coming back in vogue these days.
They certainly are.
Right. And
Yeah.
so when I say to entrepreneurs, look, what are the common shares worth at the end of the day? And how much of those common shares are held by people who are actively there today
Yeah.
versus people who are no longer part of the company?
Got it. Got it. And you want to think about that early on. I'm assuming. I mean, right at the and that's not just at the outset of selling your business, but at the outset of forming your business.
That's
I have
right.
so many clients that I just wrote a piece on this for the Philly Inquirer about just common buy sell agreements when you have more than one partner, and
Right.
how few startups actually have those in place.
So I teach a class at Kellogg at Northwestern, and I tell my students, are you now part of the greater Ackler family? Like, but there's two ways of getting kicked out of the family. One, if you're a jerk, like no assholes rule. And two, you know, if you don't have a co-founders agreement
Yep.
at the beginning
Yep.
and don't file an 83B election
Yep.
at the beginning, that's all like immediate expulsion from the Ackler family. Like, sorry.
It's true. It's just it's a roadmap to follow, and that so that and again, I guess again for if you're listening to this, you're watching this, maybe you're just a privately held business, maybe you're a family-owned business. Cap table management is no different than making sure you've got your cap table under control, and usually that's done through a buy-sell agreement. Usually that is
Right.
at the outset determined on what happens if somebody gets hit by a bus, gets divorced, gets arrested, gets fired, dies. It's just a roadmap, to follow. And to follow that roadmap, you need to make sure that you've got all of your shareholders in place.
And by the way, just one thing, Gene,
Sure.
which is, and it should be in writing
Yes.
because people are imperfect.
Yes.
Memory is imperfect. People hear different things.
Yes.
If you love somebody, if you trust somebody, put it in writing.
So that brings me to my next point. And we're jumping around here in the book, but I just want to make sure you talk about putting things in writing. So you have a whole area of the book where you talk about letters of interest or letters of intent, where they're called term sheets, the actual closing documents that are needed just to see, a deal through. Is all of that necessary? And because in Europe, I know you're like, what do you say? I mean, in the end, I thought the only legal document, and explain this to me, I thought the only legal document is the actual agreement of sale. Everything else, like a letter of intent or a term sheet or a letter of interest, are there. You can't really do people go to court over those? They just seem like just a way to document, a tentative step forward. But give me your thoughts on those.
Great question. So this is actually not you are 100% correct. The only document that really is legally binding is the final closing documents. But this is not a question of legality. This is a question of negotiation and negotiating leverage. So here's the thing. Who writes the closing docs? The acquiring company. Who's writing it? The attorneys for the acquiring company. Right. If there's something left silent, how are they going to interpret? They're going to interpret anything not spoken about in the favor of the acquiring company. Always.
Right.
So here's what happens. Most, especially inexperienced entrepreneurs, they think, oh, we'll just sign a really simple letter of intent or term sheet. It will do, all I care about is the top number, and then we'll work out all the details later.
Right.
That's what they say. Yeah, we'll just work out all the details later.
They do.
Well, guess what? The minute you sign that term sheet, you just lost 90% of your leverage. Like, it's just gone.
Yeah.
So here, I'll give you a very concrete example. Gene, you made the comment, well, in my world, most of the time the entrepreneur stays on at least for a year or 2 years, right? It's very rare that the CEO just sells it and just walks away. Right. It certainly happens, of course. Right. But in my world, they're buying people and they expect the CEO to stay on. The CEO comp is never talked about, or comp of the executive team is never talked about in the term sheet. I got to tell you,
critical item to address early on, correct?
Of course, it's like huge,
right?
And so what I have come to understand, and by the way, I have done this, like writing this book was so eye-opening for me. I learned, I went into this going, yeah, I've been a CEO 4 times. I've sold businesses. I've been a board member, investors. I've gone through lots of transactions. This will just confirm what I already know. Couldn't have been further from the truth. I learned so much. And one of the things that I learned is what is material and what needs to be negotiated up front. And where do you lose leverage? Because I got to tell you, if in my world, if you have investors, and you get a deal and the top number is great, and there's so much momentum to like close the deal, close the deal, close the deal, close the deal. And then a week before the deal's about to close, they go, oh yeah, here's your comp package.
Yeah.
And you're the CEO. Try going back to your board and going, oh yeah, I'm not doing this deal because my comp isn't what I wanted it to be.
Right. Right. Well said. So, listen, and by the way, just to add to that, in my business, my company, we sell CRM systems like Salesforce and Dynamics and systems like that. And so our salespeople, they generate quotes, and a quote is not a legally binding document. Our contract is, but to your point, that quote must have everything in it that's agreed upon with the client, so that I can just basically take it and attach it to the contract and say, this is what it is, and a letter of intent should be the same thing, right?
Right. And so the question is, because so here's the thing. If you're a CEO, maybe you sell one company. If you're in the Hall of Fame of CEOs, maybe you sell 3 or 4 or 5 companies. But the acquiring companies, like they do this, they could eat your lunch.
Yeah.
They're pros. Yeah. They do this all the time.
Yeah, sure.
And they know that the minute you sign that letter of intent, you've lost all your leverage.
Right. That's a great
point.
And
so they're saying, yeah, look, just focus on the number. We'll worry about everything else. And they also want to take you off the market. There's an exclusivity period, right? So like, they're like, yeah. Just, we'll get the term sheet done and then we'll worry about everything else later. And they also know their attorneys, they're writing the contract.
Mark, listen, we're almost out of time. So let me wrap with this. So, my son always loves to have fun with my mother, his grandmother. And sometimes when he sees her, he asks her to rank the grandchildren favorite to least favorite, which is a hilarious thing to ask. And of course, she's unable to do that. But I'm going to put you on the spot with the same question. You've got your FAIR acronym: fit, alignment, integration, and rationale. You know where I'm going with this. We've already established that your partner, Troy, has violated all 4 of those rules. But for you, if you were to pick just one out of those 4, and can you, but I would like you to, I'll put you on the spot. What do you think is the most important of the FAIR framework?
Well, here's what I'll say. To maximize return, it's rationale.
Okay.
Because the better the rationale, the stronger the rationale, the company is going to pay you the more money when they realize, when you together articulate the value together.
Right.
That's a way to build the most value.
Right.
But my favorite is cultural fit. Okay. Because life's too short to deal with people you don't share values with.
Yep.
Like, I'm sorry.
It's funny because it's like on one that's the emotional answer, and then you've got the pragmatic answer, which is rationale. You know what I mean? You have to figure out a way to balance those two.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah. I think I'd like your son.
He's very funny. He's very funny. Everyone, the book is called Exit Right: How to Sell Your Startup, Maximize Your Return, and Build Your Legacy. I have been talking with Mark Ackler. Mark co-wrote this book with Mert Sherry. You can find this on Amazon if you are looking to sell you do not necessarily have to be a technology company. This is a book written for anybody that has recently started up their company, but has to have an eye on the ball for the future and position their company to maximize their exit, whenever that may be. It's really essential reading. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. This is a great conversation.
Gene, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has been a lot of fun. Stick around. I'm going to sign off. Everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening. My name is Gene Marks. You have been watching and/or listening Biz Books. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another great conversation with another great author like Mark. So stay tuned and we'll see you again soon. Take care.